People often don't realise just how much anxiety that brings up at a time when the brain is particularly ill-equipped to cope with it.
Yeah.
It's that moment where you get an idea that your child is doing things and they're keeping them secret from you. It can be really, really tough. What they just need is being listened to, being supported, being understood. Having a confrontation with mum and dad about the fact that they're feeling low is the last thing that they need.
Hello, welcome back to Happy Mum, Happy Baby. This week we have a bonus episode brought to you from Bupa. Bupa has set us up with the amazing Sam Wass. Sam is a professor of child psychology at the University of East London and leads the research unit to the Baby Dev Lab. You may have seen Sam on the Channel 4 show The Secret Life of 4 and 5-year-olds, where he appears as an expert commentator on child development issues. Sam is working with Bupa to help parents spot the signs of mental health conditions, helping parents and carers to open up conversations about mental health with their children or other young people in their lives. And it is such an important topic. It's been reported in the last 3 years the likelihood of young people having a mental health problem has increased by 50%. And 50% of all mental health problems start by the age of 14. Facts that have blown my mind. And the following from a survey run by Bupa: 80% of parents say their child does not open up to them about their mental health, and 76% of parents say they would not feel confident they'd be able to spot the signs of a mental health condition. Sam, I'm so glad that you're here to chat about this today. How are you?
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah, looking forward to our conversation.
I feel like it's going to be full of great knowledge that I'm going to take with me. I've got 3 boys, 10, 8 and 6, and I think that feeling, like that figure of 80% of parents saying their child doesn't open up to them about things, and then, you know, knowing that so many of us worry about the signs and symptoms and how we talk. I feel like if we all, it's another stage of parenting that if we actually all talk to each other, maybe we'll be able to have a bit of, you know, support there.
Yeah, definitely. And this is something I think about a lot actually with my family. So mine are quite young, 3 and 5, but I've watched a lot of teenagers grow up through the years and through my extended family, but also I'm very, very kind of on top of the research literature. And, you know, this idea of teenagers, you know, you hear about it so much when they come closed off.
Yeah.
Mine are still at the age when, you know, my 3-year-old literally was sitting at the bottom of the stairs this morning saying, "Daddy, I'm lonely," when I was getting dressed. And, you know, "Daddy, I'm on doing a poo, I'm bored, can you come and talk to me?" And I'm always saying to my wife, you know, there's going to come a time when they're not going to want to tell us anything, and there's going to be all sorts of problems going on, and they're not telling you anything about it, you know, and that type of thing. So it's definitely something I think about a lot.
It is, and I feel like it for us, it started as soon as they started school. You know, they get in the car on the first day, and it's the first time they've been somewhere that you're not there, and it's a massive milestone, and they sit in the car, and you're like, "How was it?" And they're like, "Fine."
Yeah.
And you're like, "Okay, who did you play with?" "No one." "What? What did you eat?" "I can't remember." Like it just starts straight away.
Oh, yeah. I've actually just been doing some tips on how to get your child to open up with you.
Oh, really?
And my son just finished his first year 1 class. Conversation on the way home. I was like, okay, Professor Sam was passed into the top tips for getting your child to tell you how their day was. 1-word answer to every single question I gave him. So, yeah.
So that's good. So it happens to all of us.
Happens to all of us. Yeah.
I love this. Can you tell us a bit more about your background and your research into mental health problems with children? What drew you there?
Yeah, so I very much work at the early end of the spectrum. So I'm a developmental psychologist and a developmental neuroscientist, and I do research into the early life precursors of mental health problems. So I work on a variety of studies, one funded by the Medical Research Council at the moment, and another that I've been kind of working on for a good few years now. It's been running for about 10, 15 years, looking at the early kind of precursors and the early factors that predict who's going to go on to develop a mental health problem during later life. This is a really important type of science to be doing, because one of the things we're going to be talking about today a lot is the idea of kind of early identification and early intervention. So in loads and loads of different types of mental health condition, we get kind of what is kind of a cycle where a problem kind of cascades and it snowballs over time. So what we're trying to do is to develop better tools to try to identify as early on in the development as possible children that are at elevated likelihood of going on to develop mental health conditions during later life, so that we can put them into early interventions. So that's kind of what we do. So we're not going to be talking so much about that today. So we're going to be talking more about kind of the age which mental health problems kind of tend to onset, which is often later. So what we know from the research is that there are various kind of either genetic factors that can put you at elevated likelihood of going on to develop kind of mental health conditions during later life. So we know from various things that, there's a genetic component to everything.
So we're saying that there's things that actually can cause mental health conditions.
Yeah, so the question of cause is really, really hard to get into. So we know that there are early life factors that predispose you to be more likely to go on to develop a problem during later life, like genetics or early life stress. So that's very well understood now. So if you have a particularly stressful early life experience, you're at elevated likelihood of going on not to develop any one particular condition during later life, but you're at increased risk of developing every possible condition. So it basically gives the kind of developing brain a kind of a big kind of something, and that makes you at elevated likelihood of going on to develop kind of a variety of different problems during later life. But the age when the problems often start to show up is often much later. So the kind of, for a lot of conditions, it varies, but it's often puberty and adolescence. And we think that that's just because that's a period when the brain is going through a lot of redevelopment. So a lot of reprogramming in kind of brain areas associated with risk and reward, kind of forward planning, but also the idea of kind of self-concept. So that's, one of the things that's a really, really big issue for a lot of teenagers. They go through this period of, they used to just think of themselves as the son of their mum and dad, and they're kind of tearing up that route, as it were, and deciding, who do I want to be as an adult? Who is me? Which is kind of quite often quite a turbulent process, and it involves a lot of kind of reprogramming and a lot of change that's kind of being tracked. We're starting to be able to track that quite well in the brain. And this period of big reorganization that's happening during that period, that is kind of one of the factors that we think, kickstarts a lot of kind of mental health problems to first emerge during that period, because that's certainly what we see from the data. So kind of puberty and adolescence are the times when you start to kind of a lot of different mental health conditions first start to manifest.
Wow. I always find it's a very funny time. So if I'm with friends who have sort of teenagers, it always feels like they're not quite the children. They're not going off and playing on the trampoline anymore, but they're not quite old enough to sit around the table and, talk about what's going on. I always feel like it's a period of almost limbo in some ways. And
the pendulum swings. That's the other thing that amazes me. 1 minute they're the grown-up and they're thinking their really grown-up thoughts, and then they're just back to being, just like they were when they were 5, and it's just this swing. So, it's an amazing period of life.
So what are the most prevalent mental health issues we see in young people?
So the ones that show up most commonly kind of after puberty, so during adolescence, anxiety is very common. So that's characterised by feelings of, excessive worry, often attached to a particular thing, or kind of emotion dysregulation, where you feel that your emotions are kind of getting the better for you. That's one of them. Depression is something else that shows up very commonly during adolescence. So that's kind of feelings of low mood, becoming kind of withdrawn, uncommunicative, often kind of disrupted sleep. And then the third one, which shows up commonly during adolescence, is eating disorders. So kind of most particularly anorexia or bulimia, which can be kind of really, really tricky for a lot of families to cope with. So those are the ones that show up kind of most commonly during this specific period between about 12 and 18. And
what are the signs and symptoms that parents should be looking out for?
Yeah, so this can be a really, really tricky thing, actually, because often the types of things you'd naturally look out for, so kind of abrupt changes in mood, changes in sleep, unpredictable mood, liable to fly off the handle, are very, very common behaviours during adolescence. And pretty much everybody goes through them to a greater or lesser degree. So I think one of the good kind of rules of thumb is, is this something they're just showing at home, or is this something that's affecting their behaviour, in school? Are their friends also concerned? So that would be kind of one sensible place to start. It can be very hard, obviously, to reach out to friends. Much easier normally to reach out to a school, but they might be hiding it at school. But that's kind of one common rule of thumb. Every teenager goes through these kind of adolescent phases, but it is very common for sadly for it to develop into something more serious that they do need help with. So yeah, that is it affecting them not just in the home is a good place to start, I think.
In Bupa's survey, they said that 24% of parents said that they suspect their child has anxiety. What are the different types of anxiety and how do they present in young people?
Yeah, so the first one that shows up is actually the most common one during early childhood is kind of what we call specific phobias.
Right.
So that's where you have a learnt kind of fear reaction that can tie on often to something quite arbitrary, but you learn to associate a fear reaction with that particular stimulus. And once you've got that that pairing, it can be very hard to unlearn, and it can lead you to kind of doing a lot of things to avoid that particular thing that sets off that learnt fear reaction. So those are the earliest earliest type of anxiety disorder that tends to manifest. I think the median age is kind of around about kind of 8 to 10. They often develop. Another one that tends to start up quite early is separation anxiety.
Right.
So that is kind of in some ways similar to phobias. It's a phobia that's tied on to the idea of being separated from the parent. And then other things that are very common during teenagerhood are social phobias. So that's kind of specific kind of elements of fear around social interaction. And then there are other types that tend to develop more often during later life, such as panic disorder. So panic disorder is a very common thing, which is really, really tough to be kind of living with. I know a lot of people who are living with panic disorder, and that's where you kind of get this sudden feeling that you're getting overwhelmed and you're about to kind of have a heart attack, and you're very aware that you're in this kind of physiological kind of feedback loop, and then the more worried you get, the more kind of your heart starts to beat faster and that type of thing. So that can often start later, but it can also start during teenagerhood.
It's really interesting when we talk about those teenage years, because obviously it's such an informative time, but there's so much going on. Not only are you, in between being a child and being an adult, not only is your body going through these changes and you've got a flood of hormones, but you're also going through a very stressful time at school.
This is something that really, really, I think, really needs to change. And, from the teenagers that I've seen growing up in my family, we've had quite a few through GCSEs and A-levels. And I was actually talking to my sister about this, and I was saying, normally when you've got someone who's worried about a particular situation, you just try and de-stress it.
Yeah.
But it's what you do at 18. Like your A-levels, you don't have a choice to put them off. If you don't, you have one shot to do it. If you can do research, but basically that's one shot. And it's impossible to avoid the fact that it does have a big impact on the rest of your life. And it's exactly the age. And this is what, we didn't really realise nearly so well when we were setting up, the education system, which is just how much change there is happening in a teenager's brain. So I do research in the kind of the frontal cortex. So that's the bit where we do our kind of forward thinking, kind of our planning. And, a baby and a young toddler basically doesn't have any ability to do that. And we do lots of kind of experiments kind of measuring how that ability develops through teenagerhood, through childhood and into teenagerhood. And the brain areas that do that are still showing massive development through to the early 20s. So really a teenager is really at quite a, relatively kind of immature stage in that development. It kind of goes up for a while and then it goes down and then it goes back up. So it's really crazy that we're putting so much pressure on teenagers at that age. And the other thing actually just on that, Giovanna, is a lot of schools, the other thing that really winds me up is a lot of schools are very kind of strict. And they have this idea that, we need to have these very strong kind of rules that we put in and, make children aware that they're at risk of exclusion and that type of thing. It's very easy for, for people to focus on, we need the discipline, we need to stop them when they get out of line. But people often don't realise just how much anxiety that brings up at a time when the brain is particularly ill-equipped to cope with it.
Yeah. God, that's scary, isn't it? There are parental concerns about eating disorders that are becoming more prevalent. What are some of the signs that a young person might be struggling with eating? Yeah,
so eating disorders is something that I know can be really, really challenging. And, I think one of the reasons why eating disorders are so particularly hard to deal with for so many families are so often are characterised by secrecy. We were talking earlier about, how with young kids, they just rely on you for everything. And, you hear about every single tiny little thought that they go through their head. And it's that moment where, you get an idea that your child is doing things and they're keeping them secret from you. It can be really, really tough. And it can be a really, really kind of challenging conversation to have for lots of families. So there's a few things to be watching out for, as a parent, if you're concerned your child might be having kind of developing an eating disorder. That's one of them. So lying to you about their food is definitely kind of something that is a kind of can be a warning signal, and it can be a sign that you want to be thinking about going to your GP about it. Other common things are kind of weight loss, the types of things they can't hide from you, trying to hide it, but if they start wearing kind of baggy clothing or different style of clothing, excessive preoccupation with food, of course, is one of the key symptoms. Kind of exercising a lot, kind of going to the bathroom frequently after they've been eating can be a sign of bulimia, avoiding eating with others, if they start trying to, make excuses why they shouldn't be eating at the same time as everyone, and changes in eating habit, eating very slowly, cutting up their food into very small pieces. Another thing that's often a really, really good thing to be doing, but again, it can be really, really tough for, reasons that everybody will be really readily understanding is, trying to work out, is this something that's specific to, our household, specific to the relationship? This is often a time when teenagers start behaving very differently at home to how they do with their friends. So anything that you can do to, be talking to their friends and talking to the school, obviously, to see, is it something that's just happening at home, or is it something that's more widespread? So there are various things that you can do, but it's a really, really tough situation for families to cope with.
Well, that's a massive thing with most mental health issues, right? Because it's happening at an age where there is that independence. There is that feeling of disconnect between parents and child whilst the children try and get their independence and work out who they are. So how can they spot the difference between a normal sign of growing up, and this is just my teenager who is just like every other teenager, and something that requires a bit more attention?
Yeah, this is another really tough thing, because a lot of the really typical changes that happen through childhood are also kind of overlap a lot with the kind of symptoms of mental health disorders. So, take, for example, kind of depression and low mood makes you feel naturally withdrawn from other people. So you don't feel so talkative when you're in a low mood. Every single person in the world feels like that. It's also a sign of a typical teenager.
Yeah.
That idea that you disappear beneath your hoodie.
Yeah.
So you see so many teenagers, they disappear beneath their hoodie. And it's really natural. You don't know who you are yet. You're in this process of working out who you are. So you kind of disappear into a chrysalis. And then once you've decided who you are, then you're ready to take off your hoodie and emerge into the world. So many teenagers go through this period of being very withdrawn, particularly from their parents, because they're trying to individuate themselves, they're trying to work out who they are. So really hard to tell apart. And there are lots of other things too. So for example, I work with kind of younger children, and nervous tics, so kind of small repetitive behaviours are very, very common amongst young children, and not at all necessarily a sign that kind of the same type of thing, that if you saw an adult doing the same type of thing, you'd interpret it as a sign of something like OCD, so obsessive compulsive disorder, but very, very common in children. Another one's magical thinking, so the feeling that your thoughts can cause things to happen, which in adulthood is often a sign of a mental health condition, but isn't at all in childhood. So lots of children go through that phase of kind of magical thinking. So it can be really, really hard to tell things apart. Particularly, as I say, this idea that kind of pulling apart what behaviours are happening in the home versus what behaviour is happening more widespread. So really, really tricky for parents.
Because also we know as parents that you see a different version of your child at home compared to what they're like at school. It could be that they're just moody at home because, hey, that's where you go to be yourself, if you like, and just stop all the pretense and like get away from all the noise. Like I used to love being at home and just kind of blocking everything out, so it's really hard to kind of go, no, this is their safe space and they don't have to be, there's no performative behaviour here.
I think the reason why so many parents, and this is definitely something I feel in my family, but it's also something you hear a lot from talking to people, that as I say, my kids are much younger, but we've just got this kind of childcare swap where our neighbours drop their kids around at our house an hour and a half before school on a Thursday, and then we do the same on a Monday. And I was dealing with another parent's child's tantrum on Thursday, and it's so much easier than dealing with your own kid's children.
It's so different.
It's just like, because it's not about me, it's just this is how the child's behaving.
Is that it? Is it because when your child's having that meltdown, you're so programmed in, it kind of reflects on you in a way?
Yeah, well, it's lots. I spend a lot of time talking about this with my wife, and it's a lot that, they have a lot of your own kind of personality. Kind of, we're very excitable, and we kind of get very overexcited very quickly in my family, and that type of thing. But for a teenager, the reason this is really important thinking about in the context of parents and teenagers is because as we were saying, the young children kind of often open up, and they go through this phase of being kind of very shut off, and it's very easy to take offence at that and to think that it's because of something that you're doing wrong. Yeah. So when you have that conversation, almost every parent goes through times when they're worried about their kid in various different ways. It's how we show our love as parents. But when you go to that phase of, wanting to have a conversation with your child about the fact that, you're concerned about some aspects of their behaviour, it's very easy to make it into a conversation about your parenting and your relationship with your child and how that relationship with your child has kind of gone wrong, kind of as it were. And it's very easy for you to end up getting defensive and to say, it's because of, is it because of this? And you seem to be annoyed about this, but it was nothing about that. But often, as we were saying earlier, these changes are happening, these changes in behaviour is happening because of stuff that's happening in their brain. They're going through this really rapid period of brain reorganisation and body reorganisation as well, massive physical changes during puberty as well. And it's not about you. And a kind of a conversation about what's gone wrong in your relationship, that type of thing, just isn't what they need at that stage. What they just need is being listened to, being supported, being understood, and having a confrontation with mum and dad about the fact that they're feeling low, is the last thing that they need. Yeah.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because everyone's learning. I can remember over the years having people in here actually talking about parenting teenagers and them saying, you think it's difficult when they're little, but generally you can kind of fix things. But actually when they're older, so much of it depends on how much they're willing to open up. And also you might be ready to talk, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are. Yeah,
definitely. That's another thing that I think is really, really important, getting the time right and having the patience. So, and again, this is something I've already noticed this is a flaw in my own parenting, that, you think of what you're going to say to them, or you think, a conversation you want to have or a point that they want to make, and you drop it in, and obviously waiting for the right moment is really important. So you don't sit them down and say, right, or put it in the diary, like today we're going to have a conversation about the fact that my son seems to be feeling depressed. You get them you try and get the mood right by getting them talking first. So you ask them a few easy questions. Pick a time when you're out driving. A lot of teenagers find direct eye contact quite stressful, so you pick a time when you're out driving. Get them talking first about something they're excited about, and then try to get the mood around. Get the kind of change the topic onto what you want to talk about. But, and this is the mistake I always make, if they're not in the mood, if the first couple of questions don't go right, change gear quickly. And that's really, really important. You've got all the time in the world to talk about it. Wait until they're in a time when they're happy to be talking about it. Don't do what I always do, which is, okay, I plan to talk about this now, so he hasn't responded well, so I'm going to keep on pushing, because that can have exactly the opposite effect.
I've definitely been there. So for context, Sam, parents seem to lack the confidence to talk to their children about mental health. Bupa's survey found that 59% of parents say they wouldn't feel confident talking to their child about mental health. What might be some of the concerns and barriers that parents face that stop them from talking to their children about mental health?
So one of the important things is this idea that, feeling that it's directed against you as a parent when it isn't necessarily. But another thing is, and this is something that I've talked about with so many different parents in so many different contexts, this idea that, we know that there's heavy genetics involved in these things. We know that, if you've had problems, as pretty much everybody has in a particular area, it's likely that your child will have problems. I had a period of being quite depressed as a teenager, so it's likely that my kids will have periods of being quite depressed as teenagers. And it seems, again, really obvious that if you've got a teenager who you feel is having low mood, just to say, I had the same thing when I was your age, I've been through that. And, it seems obviously a good idea because it builds up an empathetic connection. It helps them to understand that they're not alone. It's going to help them to open up to you if they realise that you felt the same at times in your life. But so many parents find it really hard to do that. And again, it's for really understandable reasons why they find it hard to do that. It's because, they get used to so much of parenting is the habits you get into when they're young. So, when they're young, you get into the habit of, I'm the one who needs to hold my stuff together. I can't be the weak one. And, you think of yourself as the one who needs to be the authority figure, set the discipline and that type of thing. And a lot of parents think, if I reveal any weakness about myself, my kid's going to stop respecting me. Much as I really, really understand where people are coming from that, I still think it's directly, the least helpful thing you can be doing. And it's not, and the reason is it's not, true strength is not about who is the strongest in the short terms. True strength is not someone who never has mornings where they wake up feeling a bit rubbish.
Yeah.
So, being able to admit to your kids that, that you have mornings when you wake up feeling rubbish. I can't see any downsides at all in terms of, helping to build that connection between them if they're feeling the same way.
How important is it to have, I had some friends over the weekend, I had some teenagers stay in the house and their parents came to pick them up yesterday. And we were talking about the fact that for some teenagers, it's simply easier to talk to other adults that aren't their mum and dad. Mm-hmm. So how important is it, or is it a good idea to know that support network around you is also around them?
Yeah, that can really help. I guess for a lot of the kind of reasons that we've been talking about, this idea that, parents often react the wrong way, and it's much easier to do I do it myself. I used to do Samaritans, which is a kind of a line to call up for people when they're kind of at crisis moment, and you get taught to listen in a very specific way, and it's really fantastic and it really works. And there's a listening wheel and there's a listening technique to active listening, and it's all about being non-judgmental. Kind of getting people to extract as much as they can, tell you as much as they want to, getting them to help them to get the story right in their head, how you listen in that way, non-judgmental, just reflecting back to them what they say. So I learned how to do that. The number of times I'd come home from a Samaritan shift where I'd just been doing that, really carefully, methodically for 4 hours, and then my wife would start saying something about how she's feeling, and straight away I was like, no, that is the wrong emotion to be feeling. You should not be feeling like that. That is an incorrect emotion that you're feeling at the moment. And I was just like, why can't you do it with your own wife? And it's because of that connection, It's for all the reasons that we've been talking about. So yeah, it definitely does help. In a lot of ways though, and I think this is something that's really important to talk about with the parents of teenagers, that, and already I get this with my own kids, this idea that, you set everything for them when they're young, and then when they go to school and it's like their soul is getting leached out, and you're no longer so important, and that can feel really tough as a parent. But I think the really important thing, obviously by teenagerhood it's much more advanced, but I think the really important thing to remember as a parent is you're the one who's there the long term. Yeah. So, definitely short term, it can help to, have something to diffuse, if there's some, anger built up in a relationship, which very, very easily happens, very good to kind of diffuse that and to, have someone else that you can talk to. But at the same time, they do value that constancy, and they do value the fact that they know that you're the one who's just always going to be there for you. So, yeah, it swings and roundabouts, I guess.
Yeah. How can parents support their child if they notice any symptoms or suspect a mental health condition?
Yeah, so one of the important things is, as we've been saying, to talk about it. Always better to talk about it. And the next thing's really simple: go and see your GP. So your GP is the one who can, has got this very objective, this is kind of the criteria, the threshold that we use, and then knows the best place to go, the correct place to go to get services and support.
So what can parents do at home to support good mental health within the family?
I mean, I guess there's a lot of things that are worth thinking about here. I mean, one of the things I think is really important is just be open and frank about kind of moods and the fact that, everybody has ups and downs, talking about moods and labeling moods in a, non-judgmental way is really, really important. So there's lots of research that's been done. We can't inhibit emotions. Yeah. So there's been extensively tested in lots and lots of different ways. We can't cancel an emotion out when we're feeling it. And loads of different experiments have been done about different ways that we can, quote unquote, control our emotions. And pretty much the only way that's come out as effective, not quite the only way, but certainly the most evidence-based way, is this thing of mindfulness. And that's all about labeling and describing emotions in a non-judgmental way. And the reason we think it works, well, one of the popular ideas is because, so they did some brain imaging on people before and after they'd been through mindfulness. And so normally emotions happen right at the bottom of the brain, a part of the brain called the amygdala and the brain stem, so right where your spinal cord comes up into your brain. And, normally when you get people to kind of experience emotions and you look at a brain scanner, those are the areas that are primarily active. And there's some research that doing this process of mindfulness, of just talking about it and getting a verbal label for emotions and analysing it, actually physically spreads out the emotion in your brain. So, when you're thinking about anger and you've been through a mindfulness course, that your feeling of anger is kind of more spread out in your brain into your language centres, into your analysis centres and that type of thing. And there's an idea that the emotion is more spread out might be the reason why, this process of mindfulness helps us to control it. Yeah. So that's one thing that's important. Obviously, practically, it really helps to have verbal labels and to be used to be talking about emotion, because it helps you to communicate how you're feeling to other people, which is another challenge for a lot of teenagers. So those are a couple of reasons why I think, my number one thing would just be, be honest and frank and open and not ashamed of the emotions that you feel. Everybody feels down, everybody feels anxious, and just, make sure your kids are aware of that and not embarrassed about kind of talking about it.
And that can be something that's put in place then throughout their childhood. So it's not like suddenly, they turn 13 and you're suddenly talking about you being sad or whatever. It's kind of like labelling will help any child process and regulate, knowing that these things that are happening, it's an emotion. And it's okay to feel it. Yeah,
and it probably helps you too as a parent. We always do this thing on holiday where normally it's me make up these very complicated rules for these pool games that, how long can you jump through a hula hoop and into all the inflatable rings. And then I was organising everyone together and I was explaining the rules, and my sister can't cope with me being in control, so she's like constantly sniping. And I just lost it in front of the whole family. I was screaming and I stormed off down the pool and sat in my bedroom like, this and a half. And I was like, after this, my kids have never seen me lose it.
Really?
That's literally the first time. Well, you get snappy with them, but I've never just broken out and swearing, all sorts, and then stormed up. But I had a chat with them about it afterwards, and I was like, this is something, and I was thinking about exactly what they were talking about, which is, one thing which is the modelling the good emotions, and obviously the more you can do that, the better, but also just the, helping to understand how you're feeling. And, when I said, I was cross with Auntie Catherine, but I still absolutely love Auntie Catherine, we're really, really close, and, they do get it. So it depressurises you as a parent as well, I guess.
Yeah. Interesting that siblings still have that effect on you. Yeah.
I know. She's had 45 years of practicing winding me up. So.
It's so funny though. I do find that with my siblings, we just we go back to how we were. We never come out of it.
Yeah, definitely. Which is, what you love about them, exactly intertwined with what you find hard about them.
Sam, thank you so much. I've learnt so much. And I've always feel like there are certain guests that I know that I'm taking loads of knowledge from, and I'm going to carry it forward. And you're definitely one of them. I see why you do what you do. You're very good at it. Thank you.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
For more advice and information, listeners can speak to their children's schools, look at what charities and support groups can offer, can set up a GP appointment if they have any concerns that their child might have a mental health condition, seek out some brilliant resources that can be found online by searching Bupa Young People's Mental Health, including there are 4 interactive Jack conversations where parents can ask their questions about anxiety, eating disorders and depression to a qualified expert and get a real-time answer. Jack, by the way, that stands for Just Ask a Question. Bupa have also teamed up with Mum of 3 and young person's mentor, Mylene Class, who shares her personal experience in her Jack conversation. And lastly, parents can find a downloadable guide and conversation starter toolkit for parents. And that's not all. Bupa are also hosting a virtual event called Let's Talk Young People's Mental Health on the 26th of September, which will be free to attend. It's hosted by Dr. Zoe Williams, featuring Mylene Class and today's guest, Professor Sam Wass. You can sign up by visiting the Bupa website. Just search Bupa Young People's Mental Health. And guys, before I go, it's worth mentioning that when it comes to Bupa's family health insurance, when you pay for your eldest child on your policy under 20 years old, Bupa will cover all other younger children on the policy for free. Pre-existing conditions are not covered and terms and conditions apply. Thank you very much.